Hello again. Peace, everybody. Welcome to another Friday discussion on the Friday webinar series with the Arkansas Public Policy Panel. I'm Osyrus Bolly. I host the Vote and Chair podcast, and this will be a very informative discussion today about ending corporal punishment. And so we have two guests from Arkansas against Paddling with us today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we're going to jump right into the topic. And so let's start with you, Esaa.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Esaa Samarah. I'm assistant professor here at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock in the School of Social Work, and I'm also director of Arkansas Against School Paddling. I'm sure we'll go into a little bit more about what that organization is about. But yeah, I'm excited to be here.
All right, thank you, Esaa. And Ellen, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Thank you. My name is Ellen Chicocca. I am associate professor in the School of Nursing at the University of Missouri in Columbia. And I teach the nursing of children, and I have been a nurse for 43 years, and I am a pediatric nurse practitioner for the last 25 years.
Thank you, Ellen, for being here with us today as well. And so, like I said, this is a discussion about ending corporal punishment. And this is also a Citizens First Congress priority as well, too. And so we want to make sure that we get everybody that's engaged in this discussion. If you're watching live on Facebook right now, feel free to hit the share button, have your notepad ready, because we're expecting people to tap in and actually ask questions about this powerful discussion that we're having today. And so and we want to make sure that, we get to everybody's questions if you do have some questions. So make sure you put them in the chat, put them in the live comments, and we'll try to make sure we answer all those questions while we have our guests here today. But just starting off briefly, either one of you, if you wouldn't mind, just telling us about Arkansas Against Paddling, how long as organization, Arkansas Against School Paddling, I'm sorry, and how long the organization has been around, and why did it start, and just any general info you can give about Arkansas Against School Paddling.
Sure. I can hop in there. So Arkansas Against School Paddling is the official Arkansas state chapter of a larger alliance to end the hitting of children called the U.S. Alliance to End the Hitting of Children, which is a national nonprofit organization. And we work to engage school personnel, school board members, and state legislators in an effort to ban corporal punishment. And our objective is really simple: to prohibit anyone from hitting a child in Arkansas schools. Just very, very straightforward. We've been around, Ellen, remind me, we've been around since 2017. The U.S. Alliance is older than us, and we opened up as a chapter under the leadership of Jeffrey, right? Or was it someone before?
It was Tate.
Tate. Okay. I could be wrong. Someone can fact check me, but around 2017. So we've been around for a minute. And our goal is, threefold. There's the research component, just better understanding what does corporal punishment look like in Arkansas. There's the education component, educating people like we're doing today on the reality of corporal punishment in schools in Arkansas. And the third component is advocacy, and that's really why we partnered with Citizens First Congress, to be able to take that research that we're doing, take that education that we're doing, and take it to the next level to those state legislators, those decision makers that are sitting in our capital, to try to end this policy and this practice.
All right, thank you. Ellen, did you want to add anything?
So a gentleman, Tate Aldrich, started Arkansas Against School Paddling when he relocated from Connecticut to Arkansas. He was planning to get married, and his fiance was also a teacher in Arkansas, and he began teaching in Arkansas. And he lived in a small area in Connecticut, and many people are surprised that corporal punishment in schools still exists. So sometimes Esaa and I laugh to be like in a little secret competition how many times we get, wait, what? They still spank kids in schools? I thought they stopped that in the 60s with the nuns. No, there are 17 states in the United States in public schools where it's permitted. and 45 states in private school that are permitted in private schools. And people don't know about this. So when this gentleman, Tate Aldrich, came to Arkansas and got a job and saw that children were being physically punished, he was shocked because he was one of the people who thought that went away in the 1960s. And so he started this group. Now he's working on an advanced degree and he had to step away. Because I was a member of the U.S. Alliance to End the Hitting of Children, which is a national organization. I joined, but I actually live in Chicago. So we were very lucky to get Esaa, who just finished his PhD from Florida, and now he's in Arkansas. So he took over the leadership role. Tate stepped down, then we had somebody else, and now we are very lucky to have Esaa because it's not just boots on the ground. He has also expanded our focus. It is making sure the public knows this still goes on and also doing research about it because it's in the policies in the schools, but very often parents don't know about it until after the fact.
Gotcha. And so let's just dive straight into the conversation. I'm glad you brought up the fact that the founder actually was shocked when he came to Arkansas and saw that it was actually allowed in the state of Arkansas. So my first question is, I think probably one of the first comments that you hear people when we talk about ending corporal punishment, ending pattern. People are gonna say, in particular in Arkansas, they're gonna say, I was raised on whippings or whoopings. I turned out fine. It works for me. I'm a good person. I'm a good adult now. Why should I believe that corporal punishment in schools is harmful for children today if it worked out for me?
It's an excellent question. And Osyrus, I want to begin by acknowledging, right, I too was whooped in the home. And I come from a community that's very common. Just because something is common doesn't mean that it ought to continue, right? I can think of multiple examples throughout history, but I won't go on that track. Instead, I want to share with you a personal story of why I became interested in this subject, because this is part of my research agenda as a faculty member here at University of Arkansas Little Rock, and it's also part of my advocacy agenda as a social worker as far as my service in the community. But I want to bring you back. This was the year I was a young social worker, a child welfare worker. I was a child protective investigator in the state of Florida, actually. I was maybe 21, 22 at the time. And I got a case where a child was actually hit. I'll spare the details here. Don't need to vicariously traumatize anyone. But the child's injuries were so severe that I actually met the child at the Child Protection Team, CPT, which are the medical folks who respond whenever there's child abuse case in the area that I was working at the time. And so I met with the child who was only 5 years old, right? And he had very clear pattern bruising all over his bottom side, all over his buttocks. And of course, the CPT team, the medical staff, they were documenting everything they needed to, treating the child, going through the procedure, and it was time for me to sit down and interview this kid. And principally, I wanted to know, and this kid, I'll add, was also going through the custody battle. He's in foster care, kind of going in and out. And I asked the kid, all the questions that a good child welfare social worker would ask, after introducing, getting some rapport with the child, making sure he felt comfortable. I started asking and just inquiring, well, where did this injury come from? And again, remember, he's 5, and he's probably developmentally delayed a little bit. So the conversation was probably, if you can imagine, maybe talking to a 3.5, 4-year-old. And he begins to describe the tool that was used to hit him. And what he was describing to me sounded like a piece of wood. And so immediately, as a social worker, I'm like, this kid was hit with a weapon, a tool, like an actual weapon. And so I continued my interview, and it became clear to me that this incident didn't happen at home. This incident didn't happen with his foster parents. This incident actually happened at school. And then I went back to the folks at the CPT team, and I said, hey, look, can I see the documentation of these injuries, the size, the shape, all of it? Because it was a pattern bruise. Welt, I should say. And sure enough, it was the shape of a paddle. And so I went out to the school and I began interviewing folks around the campus, and it became clear to me that one of the teachers took it upon herself to paddle this kid in school after he had exposed himself to another child on the playground. And in her mind, she said, not on my watch. I need to discipline this kid right now, quickly, and forcefully to make sure that this child doesn't do this ever again. That kind of harsh punishment. I'm going to give this kid a whooping and he'll learn. He will learn not to do this anymore. This is inappropriate behavior. Now, as a social worker, and many of you out there in the audience, and I'm not sure how many of you are out there, right? But if you know anything about child development, you would know that a child exposing themselves on the playground is probably indicative of prior abuse. And as a child welfare professional at the time, that's the red flag that went off in my head. And so to me, that piece of information was critical to actually crack open this case, and eventually became known that this child was actually sexually abused. And he was acting out on the playground as a means of trying to communicate to everyone that he was in trouble, right? And so I share this story, not to share the trauma of that case, because it was quite traumatic and quite horrific, but I share this story to point out that by using corporal punishment, right, the intentions of that teacher were to make sure that that child stepped back in line, that he didn't do that to another kid, that he, to communicate that the behavior that he was engaging in was inappropriate. All those things seem to make sense. But if you just stop for a second, just for 1 second, and think about, why is this child taking this action, right? It would have become clear that we're actually dealing with a victim. We're dealing with a child victim. We're dealing with a kid that's crying out for help. But instead, they re-traumatized that child. They injured the child. And now we're dealing with even more compounding trauma on top of what was already existing, right? And I wish I could tell you that this wasn't common, but unfortunately, it is incredibly common. We know from the research that I've conducted and research that my colleagues have conducted. I can point to Elizabeth Gershoff's work as a prime example. We know that the kids in public schools who are hit are more likely to be those kids who are experiencing trauma at home. And so what's happening there, right? Kids who are experiencing trauma at home go out to school, they're crying out for help, they're kids, they don't know how to communicate, they communicate by acting out. And instead of being supported, instead of being heard, instead of someone just sitting down and talking to them, instead they're hit. And now that trauma continues to be compounded. So I want to reach out to those folks who are saying, look, I was hit and I'm fine. I want to reach out with empathy and say, hey, look, I get it. I too come from a background where that was common. But just because something's commonplace doesn't mean that it ought to be continued. We should probably take a step back and think about this practice for a second. I can point to the research that shows us the harms documented from corporal punishment. I talked about the physical harms from corporal punishment. There was an example just less than 6 months ago in, correct me if I'm wrong, Ellen, it was in Mississippi where a child's arm was broken while he's being paddled in school, right? These are not uncommon occurrences. But I can also tell you that the impact of being paddled, the punishment, is not distinct or dissimilar from the negative socio-emotional impact of being physically abused, right? Those two things are very similar. We can see it in the research that we've done. And it's also ineffective. One of the common kind of outcomes of being paddled is more misbehavior, acting out, which allegedly is the reason why people would paddle kids in the first place. You want to get them in line. And so I can go on and on and on, just the volumes and volumes of research documenting the ineffectiveness of corporal punishment. And I can also empathize with folks saying, look, we want to make sure that we impart discipline on our children, that they learn how to be, productive members of society. My question to anyone in the audience who is still attached to corporal punishment is, do you really believe that we need to hit folks in order to train them to be productive members of our society? I don't know any other corner in our society where we allow this to happen. If I were to hit a stranger on the street, it would be felony assault. We're not even allowed to hit incarcerated folks, right? That would be cruel and unusual punishment. Yet within our public schools, consistently, we still hit kids. Not only just hit them, we hit them with pieces of wood. That would be assault with a weapon in any other setting. So I would just encourage folks to just take a step back and think about the practice from a more holistic perspective.
Thank you. Ellen, did you want to add anything?
Yes, I do.
Mm-hmm.
So when people say, I was hit and I turned out fine. I know from studying child development as a nurse that a child, even if that child is an adult, knows that they have depended on that parent for their very survival. And that parent means the world to them. So if they were to step back and say, my parent did to me something, if I just sit and listen to what Esaa said about all the harmful effects of hitting, that has been documented over and over in the research. It causes kids to be more aggressive. It increases rates of depression, anxiety, school failure. There is not one single positive effect, except when you smack like a toddler, they will stop reaching towards something hot on the stove because you startled. That's the only thing we can come up with. It increases their chance to hit other children, and then as they get older, to hit their peers and hit in intimate relationships. So I believe that when people say, I was hit and I turned out fine, that is a way of telling their soul, I can't believe that my mom or my dad would do that to me. And so they say they turned out fine. Now, I was hit, and I was also paddled in school. And I am old, and I remember that paddling I got in first grade before I bet anybody on this session was born with that nun. And all I did was smile at a boy. So the effects that it has. The other thing I want to bring up is there are historical and religious and cultural factors that influence the social acceptability of hitting kids. So the schools in the states that permit school corporal punishment are in the southeast part of the United States. And in the southeast part of the United States is where British settlers had plantations. And in British culture, the term caning and birching, that's where it started, because they would take a tree branch, like from a birch tree, and hit a kid at school or hit. So people who came from West Africa against their will for those hundreds of years, those cultures did not use physical punishment with their children. That is well documented. That was forced upon them when they were forced to work on plantations. And there's something called social learning theory, that you learn to how to, what is culturally normative by what's around you. So one of the things that is in the research, that children who are hit in school are more likely to be boys, they are more likely to be Black, and they are more likely to have disabilities. And I'm not talking about like a wheelchair disability. I'm talking about, for example, ADHD or something like that. And so this is why it needs to be eliminated completely. The American Academy of Pediatrics published a position statement in 2023 calling for all 50 states to eliminate this practice because it is barbaric, and by any other name, as Esaa just said, it's assault.
Thank you. And I think that was a great way to start off this conversation, because like Esaa mentioned, striking another adult in the workplace is considered assault, but we don't call it the same thing when we're talking about a child at school. It is not taken with the same seriousness. And so my next question to either one of you, how can schools claim to be trauma informed when they actively inflict trauma through corporal punishment?
I'm glad you asked that question, and I was hoping you'd go there. If I may, I'm going to share. Let's see. I'm going to share this.
Okay.
See if y'all can y'all see that?
It's loading. There we go.
Yep, we see it.
All right, cool. Now the map you're looking at here. Let's see if I do this. Can y'all still see that or no? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what I'm showing you here is, and for folks at home, you can scan this QR code, and it'll bring you to a report that I co-authored with some colleagues at Prevent Child Abuse America. And this is some of the earliest work that I did on corporal punishment. Like I said, my earliest experience is that experience that I just shared with you when I was a child protective investigator in Florida. As a doctoral student over at Florida State, I started working with Prevent Child Abuse America, which was a national organization conducting research on this topic. And what we wanted to know was, and this hadn't been done for, at that point, close to 8 or 9 years, we wanted to do a landscape policy analysis. We want to know which states in the United States are continuing to use corporal punishment or continue to allow corporal punishment legally. Which states have no ban on corporal punishment, meaning that they don't have a law explicitly saying that they do, but they don't have a law explicitly saying that it's illegal. Those that have a ban, obviously. And then that star, and Osyrus, this is what you're referring to, right? How can we reasonably say that we're trauma-informed while still hitting kids? And so we posed a very simple question. Of those states that continue to allow corporal punishment, how many of them in their state statutes have mandated by law some component of trauma-informed education? Now, trauma-informed education, it's an umbrella term, right? There's no one thing that you can point to that say, aha, this is trauma-informed education. Instead, it's more of a tapestry. So we looked at 4 components in that tapestry, right? Trauma-informed education, professional development, positive behavioral supports, positive school climate, and alternatives to exclusionary discipline. These are kind of chains in the armor of trauma-informed education, if you will. And sure enough, in each of the 18 states that we identified that continue to allow corporal punishment or have no ban on corporal punishment, every single one of these states had at least one or more of these mandated, not suggested, mandated. And Arkansas was one of those states. And so that to me was a very alarming and noteworthy finding. The reason why, from our perspective, I would argue that there is no world where you can reasonably implement the law that is on the books right now in Arkansas, which, if memory serves me correct, was passed in 2021, and it mandates positive school climate in our schools here in Arkansas. Oh gosh, it was like House Bill 1610 from 2021. I'm pulling this off the top of my head, so fact check me, if you will. But it's in the education statute, which I believe is Chapter 6 in our state statute. Anyway, numbers regardless. How can we reasonably implement that law while we're still allowing teachers and others and principals and administrators to hit kids with a piece of wood? The answer is it's impossible. What they've done is created a legal gyre in which the trauma-informed education policy that they mandated, they put into law, can't actually reasonably be practiced. I have been trying to just climb the highest hill and yell as loud as I can, saying, look, this does not make sense. There is no way for you to be reasonably doing this. So to answer your question, Osyrus, you can't. You cannot reasonably say that you are a trauma-informed education system while still allowing kids to be hit in school. It's impossible.
Thank you. And I want to, Sam, make sure that point is clear, because I think a lot of times, even when we're passing policies and laws, a lot of times it's a conflict of interest with another law or another statute or just what's being allowed in our communities. And so people have to understand that that's a phrase that has really been pushed. I'm not going to say a phrase, but that's 2 words that have really been pushed here when we start talking about social and emotional learning in our schools, is having more people come in to train teachers on trauma, on being trauma-informed, train faculty, staff, administration, all of these things, so that they aren't triggering children. But then we run into this issue with, not ending corporal punishment, which is very triggering for a lot of people and a lot of children as well, too. And that kind of just, I just want to kind of just follow that up with another question to people who might feel like they can't advocate for ending corporal punishment. If we're going to ban paddling in schools, how do we make sure we discipline and it's still consistent to where children don't get away with bad behavior?
Ellen, you want to take that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So the American Academy of Pediatrics, as I said, published a position statement in 2023, and they have some suggestions. And one of the things that I really like a lot is something called restorative justice. And so if it's developmentally appropriate, the kids are called in. So, and they are spoken to, and the kid who's been doing the bullying or whatever has to engage in restorative justice. The unfortunate thing, though, there's data from the Southern Poverty Law Center that talks about children being hit if they're late for school, if they have late school fees, if they're not wearing the appropriate garb for the day. And very often that is not the child, well, not very often, it is not the child's fault. And it also is potentially a reflection of the parent's socioeconomic status. So what needs to happen, because culturally, I talked about history, religion, and culture, culturally, there's such social acceptability of hitting children, like this is going to fix something. But if a child is late or doesn't have their school fees or sits in the wrong seat, what will hitting the child do to rectify that? So it's a very complex question. And it just has to, I think, come from the, there's a law being, what's the word I want, Esaa?
Debated?
No, the law that Chris, the law that was brought forth into Congress, sponsored by Chris,
Bonamici, the Protecting Our Students.
Yeah, Susan Bonamici, but yes, yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. So I think really what we need to do is just have a national law that bans corporal punishment in public and private schools in all 50 states. But that has failed in Congress more than once.
Unfortunately. It's also failed in our state legislature as well. I want to add too, you see me clicking around here, to add a little more data to this question. Let me share this table with you. So again, I share that this is part of my research agenda here at UA Little Rock. And one of the questions that I asked myself, because I sat down with lawmakers at the Capitol, and I wanted to know really what they thought of this practice. Many of them didn't know that it was still happening, surprisingly enough. And when I asked them, they said, well, and you can read it in some of the transcripts, right? I mentioned that in the state of Arkansas, attempts had been made to ban corporal punishment in the state, and they failed. 2017 was one of those years where, and I'm forgetting the sponsor of that bill, a bill was forwarded, it failed, to ban corporal punishment in public schools in Arkansas. And during the debate on the House floor, if you read the transcripts, you'll see that a lot of folks said, look, corporal punishment's necessary as a deterrent, right? It's necessary as a deterrent because without it, kids will be out of control and school behavior is out of control. And we want to make sure that this learning environment, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things that I wanted to do, being the good researcher that I am, I said, okay, let's just take that argument at face value, but I want to test it empirically. I don't want to take their word for it, but let's just assume for a second that they are right. How can we test that? So one of the ways that we were trying to be creative with the data that exists, and we pulled all these data from the Arkansas Education Association, or no, sorry, not the Arkansas Education Association, the ADA, the Arkansas, it's part of the Arkansas Department of Education list of data that they compile and make publicly available. And so we pulled data from all of the 232 public school districts in Arkansas, those traditional public school districts in Arkansas, 172 of which allow corporal punishment, and the rest don't. And so, we have a very natural experiment here. Already in Arkansas, there are districts who have voluntarily banned corporal punishment at the district level. So at the state level, it's legal. At the district level, they said, no, we're not going to do it. I live in Pulaski County, right? The Pulaski County School District is a district, for example, that has banned corporal punishment voluntarily. And so the question that I wanted to ask myself is, okay, let's assume for a second that their argument is right. Without corporal punishment, kids are going to be misbehaving. Where would we see it? Well, we'd probably see it in detentions, suspensions, and expulsions. Because in the absence of corporal punishment, if kids are acting up, you'd likely see an increase in those three categories. Now, if their statement is true, then we see a significant difference between those districts with corporal punishment and those districts without corporal punishment. Meaning that in the districts without corporal punishment, we should see higher detentions, higher suspensions, higher expulsions. If what they're saying is true. Spoiler alert, that was not the case. I've circled it here in red, going back to our, undergraduate statistics classes. I did a simple difference of means as a t-test to compare the difference between the rates of detention, suspension, and expulsions in districts that have corporal punishment and districts that don't have corporal punishment. There was no significant difference between the two. In fact, if you look at the raw scores, detention, suspensions, and expulsions were actually higher in districts that allow corporal punishment, which completely undermines their argument, right? And so the data just don't support it. When we talk about controlling behavior in the classroom, we know that corporal punishment does not work. We know it from national level data. And now, thanks to this research, we know it at the state level too. It's not working. It's not an effective disciplinary strategy. The data don't lie.
Esaa?
Yeah.
Detention is something else that they recommend on the AAP position statement, but the other thing is, I don't think enough. So children want to be accepted. All humans do in their social group. That is a survival strategy that's built into our brains, that we want to be accepted by the group to survive. And so when kids act out and are getting in trouble, that is a sign that something is wrong. And what is perplexing to me, that the teachers don't understand that that's a cry for help. If a student is consistently acting out, are they frustrated because they're not understanding the lessons? Is there something going on at home? And the sad thing is, many school districts, for budget reasons, have cut social workers, clinical psychologists, et cetera, so there aren't really the resources there for the child to receive support at school. And then maybe the family has a job that does not have insurance, or insurance that has enough coverage for the child to receive individual therapy for whatever is going on. So it's just sort of this vicious cycle that continues.
Thank you. Jared, go ahead, Esaa. I'm sorry.
No, I just said well said.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing all of this information. And I kind of want to backtrack a little bit too, because we talked about things from a historical context towards the beginning of the conversation. And one of the stats that I think really shows you the disparities in corporal punishment is that Black students are more than twice as likely to be struck than their white peers. How is that even justified?
It's not. It's outrageous. And here's the other thing. So if in these school districts, and Esaa and I have gone through their discipline policies with a fine-tooth comb. Mm-hmm. If you have a parent or parents that say, you will not put your hands on my child, then the option is an out-of-school suspension for 3 days, but the child is not permitted to make up their work. So then that puts them behind the 8 ball academically and puts them at risk for being held back. Mm-hmm. And then there is an advocate in Mississippi, her name is Ellen Reddy, who has a whole group fighting corporal punishment in the state of Mississippi, where it is most frequent. She calls that the school to prison pipeline, because if the child keeps failing classes, mm-hmm. and then is assaulted at school and starts to associate school with being assaulted and humiliated, they drop out. Mm-hmm. And so you can see, and when you look at that map where it takes place, historically, it all makes sense. And so this is why there are lawmakers that have been lobbying Congress to say this needs to be outlawed at the federal level. No schools in the United States. And here's the other thing. The United States is a member of the United Nations. And there's something called the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And in that convention, it states that no child shall be corporally punished in the home or school. And the United States is the ratified it. For years, it used to be the United States and Somalia, but Somalia ratified it. There are 68 countries in the world that have banned corporal punishment in the schools and the home. But the United States is not one of them.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting, the industrialized nations who still permit school corporal punishment are all former British colonies, the United States, Singapore, and then one section of Australia, because it was such a thing in Britain. And most of the plantation owners were British, where they used these. That's why in the South, they use the tree branches, they call them a switch, but British called them caning or birching. And they had to measure the width with their fingers to make sure it was thick enough. In the research I've done, grown people talk about their experiences and talk about wanting to pick a skinny branch because they would make them pick their own switch, wanting to pick a skinny branch because it wouldn't hurt as much. And then they would get in more trouble for picking a skinny, flimsy tree branch. So they'd have to go back and get another one and get hit harder.
Yeah. Or I've heard they would tell them to go get another one and braid them together, and
Yeah.
that would be the next level of the punishment. So, I think a lot of times, I don't think it. I know a lot of times religion and money influence people's decisions on a legislation and policy level, on a political level. And, growing up in the Deep South, one of the phrases that you hear from the Bible, spare the rod, spoil the child.
Doesn't exist.
and also, so you hear that, and that's the way that people kind of justify it. So that's part one of my question of, like, how do you break that language down and explain that to a parent, and to helping them understand ways to discipline the child, and also long-term costs for taxpayers in Arkansas. What are the long-term costs when we perpetuate corporal punishment? And I'm talking about, if y'all have seen any research or data from the costs that come from the increased mental health services needs, the juvenile legal system involvement, or the loss of education attainment. So just those two.
Those two questions are blowing off the roof.
Okay, let's blow it off then. I'll be the big bad one today.
Okay, so should I take the religion and you take the cost, Dr. Samarah?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so there is absolutely, so they're referring to the book of Proverbs in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to remember that, so there's a scholar, Stacy Patton, who has written a book about the corporal punishment of children. She was a foster child herself, who have been beaten. She keynotes a lot of child abuse conferences. She wrote a very interesting Substack yesterday when James Dobson, who was the founder of Focus on the Family, passed away yesterday. I would invite people to read her Substack because it's delicious. But when she gives her talks, she is a little tiny bit flashy. Love her though. She will pull out $100 bill and say, if you can open up your pocket Old Testament and find me where it says spare the rod, spoil the child, I will give you this $100 bill, because it doesn't exist. There are other verses in Proverbs, like, Proverbs 23, I've got it right here. Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beat him with the rod, he will not die. Thou shalt beat him with the rod and shalt deliver his soul. There's a lot of talk about, translations from Hebrew. The rod means like a shepherd's rod, teaching the child. And there's not a word about it in the New Testament. Jesus has never said a word about hitting children. And we also have to think about the African people who were brought to the United States to the South against their will and forced to work for free to make those plantation owners rich. Were not Christian. So they started to identify with stories from the Old Testament because the Hebrews were slaves for comfort. And then the Baptist form of Christianity in the South was common, and then that was sort of foisted upon them. And it's become, all these hundreds of years later. Their children had been beaten on the plantation, and it became socially normative. Another thing they believe is that you have to hit your child so that they are ready for police brutality. But that has not, the data will show you that does not protect young Black males from police brutality. It doesn't do anything. So when I work as a nurse practitioner and I have conversations with parents that I already have a relationship with, the caveat is I have to have a relationship with them already. I talk about these things and I say, your ancestors, this was not in your past. Stacey Patton will say, decolonize your parenting. This is not something that your ancestors did. They did peaceful, gentle parenting in groups like you do now. That's what your ancestors did. So there was always a mother or an auntie that could take a baby that was crying or a toddler that was fussing. And they did not hit to keep the child quiet because they had relief. So there is no justification in the Bible to hit children. Jesus in the New Testament talks about children being very precious and a gift. And all those proverbs are misinterpreted, and scholars believe that the translation from Hebrew, because the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, the rod most likely meant the shepherd's rod for teaching and guiding by example.
Thank you for breaking it down. And I love how you talked about that and tied it into getting ready for police brutality, because we can't even go into the origins of where the police come from in this conversation. But that's just interesting that you brought that up too as well, because it's all a outcome of enslavement. But
Yes, it is.
yeah,
100%.
yeah. Esaa, I'm gonna let you jump in. I'm gonna just restate the question for the viewers, because I know you have probably some data or maybe even a graphic to share. The long-term cost of perpetuating paddling, whoopings, corporal punishment. What do we see from it as taxpayers? How it is, the increases in it for mental health services, juvenile legal system, yada, yada, yada. I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah. Oh, excellent question. Before I jump in there, I wanted to share, there's a person by the name of Darrell Armstrong, Pastor Darrell Armstrong. He's on the board of directors at the Association of Professionals Solving the Abuse of Children, APSAC. He does some excellent work around the religious justification for corporal punishment and really breaks it down in a way that I think is meaningful for folks both within and outside of that community. So I just want to put that name out there. Google it, Pastor Darrell Armstrong. I met him a number of times at conferences. He's a great guy. On the economic burden of corporal punishment, one might say it's a complicated issue. It's hard to calculate. Things are challenging, but we also sent a person to the moon. We can do hard things, right? And so I want to point to one of the benefits of being a social worker is not only do I get to do research myself, but I also have been trained to find really good research from other folks, so I don't have to do it myself because there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. So I want to point out two scholars. The first goes by the surname Fang. He is a biostatistician in somewhere in North Carolina. Let's see. East Carolina University in the School of Medicine. I love our biostatisticians because what they get to do is take really big data and break it down in ways that make sense to us. And so for those of you at home, he published a paper in 2012. I've cited it so many times, called The Economic Burden of Child Maltreatment in the U.S. and Implications for Prevention, right? And why am I talking about child maltreatment? I thought we were talking about corporal punishment. For those of you who are good students out there, you will note that I previously said that there is no difference in impact between the use of corporal punishment, both at school and at home, and child maltreatment. Those two things are the same. We know that from the extant literature. So then it bears to reason that if we can calculate the economic burden of child maltreatment, we can approximate the burden of corporal punishment. Now, according to his paper, and again, I would encourage you to read it, the estimated average lifetime cost per victim of non-fatal child maltreatment, so corporal punishment would fall into that category, is $210,000 in 2010 dollars, right? We can do an inflation calculation for today, but let's just say $200,000, including $32,000 in additional child health care costs, $10,000 in adult medical costs, $140,000 in productivity losses, $7,000 in child welfare costs, $6,700 in criminal justice costs. Again, considering that school to prison pipeline that we're talking about, these kids that are hit, they're more likely to enter the criminal justice system. And then also about $8,000 in special education costs. Now, he's not the only one doing this work. I have colleagues over at Prevent Child Abuse America, Melissa Merrick, with some colleagues, including Bart Klicka, who did another study. This one's a little more recent, in 2018, called The Economic Burden of Known Cases of Child Maltreatment in each state. And so I could pull up Arkansas specifically. Let me see what they said about Arkansas. I forget off the top of my head. And again, please, for those of you at home, look up these papers. That's my homework assignment to you as a good professor. So in Arkansas, in the year 2018, there were 58,000, right, reports of child maltreatment, which were about 8,500 unique children, right, unique victims associated with those cases. Now, the lifetime economic burden, so lifetime, right, not just that year, but the lifetime economic burden of those cases is $48 billion.
Wow.
Over their lifetime. And so they break it down really nicely, and they use the state of Florida as an example because I hail from Florida, so I think I can say this. We're kind of the poster child for all things not great. But, you know, let's see what they break it down really nicely for us. So they say of the let's see, there were 292,000 investigated cases of child maltreatment in Florida. Of those investigated cases, about 36,000 were substantiated, meaning that there was, in fact, abuse occurring. So for fiscal year 2018 in the state of Florida, the cost of that is $245 billion. So to put it another way, of the cohort of children who were investigated for allegations of abuse and neglect, and I'm quoting here, for fiscal year 2018 in the year of Florida, collectively, the cohort of children will incur costs of nearly $245 billion over their lifetimes due to consequences associated with that abuse or neglect, including medical costs, including education costs, including mental health care costs, and importantly, including criminal justice costs. Because again, we are creating a pipeline here for children to go into the criminal justice system. And so the economic burden, Osyrus, if I can answer the question more simply, it's significant. The problem here with a lot of this is it's hidden, right? And that's the issue that I always, as a child welfare scholar, as a child maltreatment scholar, I always bump into. The cost, the social, the economic, the interpersonal, the emotional, the personal costs here are often hidden. And I know you, Osyrus, deal with a lot of hidden populations in the work that you do. Just because folks aren't aware of it, just because folks don't see it, doesn't mean it's not a problem. It doesn't mean that the scope of the problem is not enormous. And so there are a lot of people doing some really, really critical work around putting numbers to the burden. And I think the folks that I mentioned are just some of the key players in that space, but there are others that I'd encourage you to look into. But if anybody tells you, oh, it's complicated, you can't. We can do hard things, and we can, and we have.
The issue is, though, most people, not all, a lot of people do not think children have rights. And so this kind of stuff wouldn't really bother them. They would say, you know, like Osyrus said earlier in the conversation, well, then what do we, if we can't hit them and they misbehave at school, then what are they just going to run wild? But 68 other countries have banned it and realized that it is assault and a violation of somebody's rights. And children are people and they have rights. And we're not saying don't set boundaries on behavior and to not socialize them into what is appropriate or inappropriate behavior. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying that it can be done without assaulting them.
Right.
Thank you, thank you. And it's important, I'm glad you said it, children have rights. You know, and as time progresses, laws change. And so we have to get people to understand that, you know, when the evolution of things, you know what I'm saying, what was once acceptable is no longer acceptable. You know, women have rights now. You can't treat a woman like you could 80 plus years ago and think that that's acceptable or legal. So, yeah, we have to get people to understand that. I got two last questions, and I'm gonna definitely let the announcements and the website direction and the call to action be announced. But I just two questions, and for each of you or whoever wants to answer it. For somebody that's listening right now, a parent that is wanting to move into that direction of being a parent that doesn't look at whoopings as the answer for everything. One, what are some healthy discipline strategies that teachers, that parents can use that are firm and not violent? And then the second part of it, which applies more to you all's organization, is how can ending corporal punishment in schools actually build stronger partnerships between parents, teachers, children, and the community?
Want me to take the first one, Esaa, or what do you want to do?
Go for it. I'll take the second one.
So, because I am what they call a primary care pediatric nurse practitioner, that means I do checkups, and then if kids come in with rashes, ear infections, colds, stomach aches, I check them. And so I'm very focused on prevention, which is different from what I did when I was a bedside nurse and worked in the intensive care unit and the emergency room, when spanking never occurred to me because the kind of child abuse injuries I saw were so severe the child needed to be in the emergency room or the intensive care unit. So what I hear consistently is that parents do not have good knowledge about normal child development. Where did they learn that? So parents do not know that babies cry to communicate their needs. They can't talk, so they cry. And that you cannot spoil them by picking them up when they cry. And older infants who are starting to crawl and move around don't get into things to irritate you, but that's how they learn about their environment. And then the classic dropping something on purpose to pick it up. They're not doing that to annoy you. They're learning about cause and effect. And then toddlers with their tantrums, which are worse if they aren't talking yet, if they're hungry, and they haven't had a nap. So the transition from needing 2 naps, look, when they're an older infant, to 1 nap, which takes about 3 to 6 months, depending on the kid, is kind of a little bit of a nightmare for parents because they never know, am I able to run out to the grocery store and bring Sally with me, or is she going to have a meltdown because she needs a nap? So that's a very difficult time. People don't know this. Preschoolers love to tell tall tales. They have wild imaginations, and so sometimes they lie and they don't realize they're lying. They have wild imaginations. And then school-age kids, when they start to get into social media and bullying, and then teenagers are a whole separate story. Mm-hmm. So what I like to do is with every visit say, you know, you cannot spoil a baby by holding them, and they will cry less if you hold them. So get a snuggly and hold her in the front of you. And you can get things done like folding your towels, answering your emails. Once she can hold her head up at about age 6 months, that's when you can put her behind you if you need more space in front of you when you are working on your computer. Do not do that if you're cooking, because something can splash or she can grab and you can get burned. She can get burned. It's normal for her, if you have braids and colorful barrettes, for her to pull at that. And if that hurts you, then put her down. She's not doing it on purpose. People do not learn this when they have classes in middle school and high school where they learn about the birds and the bees.
Mhm.
I think that would be an ideal time to teach them about child development, because they don't know and they pop off. So that, if I was the queen of the world, that's what I would do, is teach people about child development so they prevent things that trigger them, that make them pop off, like crying and tantrums and lying and being able to recognize when their child is having trouble in school. And what children have different personalities and temperaments. Some are more sensitive and need a little extra time for you to sit with them, and others are more resilient. So, and if you're not ready to have children and you don't want more children, there are lots of things you can do about that. And that's also what I tell parents, and I can help you. But when people have more children than they can afford emotionally, psychologically, and financially, very often that leads to family violence. So that's my answer to that question.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll hop in on the second question really quickly. What Ellen was referring to here, I want to, again, I'm giving everybody homework, but really, really quick. There's a person by the name of Dr. Becky Kennedy. She's a child psychologist. She talks about this thing that she coined, the most generous interpretation. So it's a technique that you assume the best intentions of your child's behavior, right? You don't just automatically assume they're being annoying, they're doing this to really get under my skin. It's everything that Ellen just discussed. And she wrote a book called Good Inside, and there's a podcast by the same name. I'll encourage you to look into it. But the idea there is, let's take a step back and think about the most generous interpretation of the behavior that you're witnessing. It's a way for you to empathize with your kid. And I wanted you to think back to that very first example that I gave you, right? When I was a young child welfare worker and I met that kid at child protection team who had been severely beaten. If someone just stopped for a second, the most generous interpretation of that kid's behavior on the playground, they would have realized that this kid is asking for help. He's crying out, and he's a kid, and he doesn't have the words for it. So if we can do that, I think we can prevent a lot of what's happening. Now, as far as what you can do at home, if you're a parent with a kid in Arkansas, I want to share this QR code with you. It goes to our website. The website's also underneath it, Band Paddling Arkansas, or AR.com. These are my next steps, right? I'm trying to include children's voice in here. I'm working currently with Arkansas Education Association. We have a survey out to teachers to better understand their perspective on this. I'm kind of knocking on the door of the Arkansas Parent Teacher Association. But if you're a parent and you're in a district that continues to allow corporal punishment, your voice is absolutely essential. So go on that QR code, take a look at our website. On that website, you'll find a nice little map that we generated where you can easily look up, are you living in a district that allows corporal punishment or not? And if you're not clear, reach out to us, shoot me an email. I'm really easy to find. You can find me at UA Little Rock, or you can find me at our Kansas Against School Paddling. Let's have a conversation. I would love to network with you and see how we can't convince your board of directors at your child's in your school district to be one of the growing number of districts in Arkansas that are banning corporal punishment voluntarily in the absence of action at the state level. We don't have time to wait for our state lawmakers to take action here. We can take action at an individual level, and I encourage you to do so. So please check out our website, shoot me an email, come by my office. It's messy, as you can see, but I'll make a cup of coffee for you and we can have a conversation. Truly, that is a very real invitation. So please take me up on it. And with that, that's all I got.
All right. Well,
I'll leave this up for a little bit.
Thank you all for being with us here today. We're talking to our Kansas Against School Paddling, and it's been a very informative discussion. I could ask you probably 10 more questions, and I still would have more. So I'm going to cut it short here. But just a quick call to action. How could people become involved with your organizations? How can they become advocates to end corporal punishment, even if they're not in Arkansas? And what are their next steps to joining you all, or any announcements about any events that you want to have or share?
Sure. Same deal. Head to our website, shoot us an email there. There's a contact us section there that you can find. If you want to get involved, if you're here on the ground in Arkansas, or if you're in another state, or if you're in a state that continues to allow corporal punishment, like our neighbor states in Texas, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Alabama. I talk to folks in those states all the time, and we can loop you into the U.S. Alliance to end the hitting of children. There are any number of organizations that you can get involved in, but that first step is just you reaching out.
All right. Well, Ellen and Esaa, I thank you all for being here today. I think this conversation went really well. And please send your links and QR codes to me as well. We're going to publish this on our podcast as well too, so people who will only get to listen to the audio, they'll be able to get those links in the description of the podcast as well too, so they can follow up. We appreciate y'all for being here today with us on this Friday webinar. Please continue to keep us informed, and thank y'all. And again, appreciate everybody for viewing it as well too. We'll see y'all again at another Friday with another webinar series. All right.
Thank you for being an excellent host and for your excellent questions as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll see you in the community, Osyrus. Take it easy.
All right, peace.
Bye.